The UN and our hosts here in UAE for making sure that gender was on the table once and for all, and we have a chance to really explore all the ways that gender and climate are connected. We're going to get right into it so that you have a chance to hear from all of these distinguished panelists. But Jen, I want to start with you because you just made this incredible announcement of the WISE initiative, which is an impressive and historic $1.4 billion commitment to ensure that women and girls have access to the jobs, training, and finance that they need to succeed in the industries that are both critical to our future and our planet. So who are the partners for this, and what types of programs will the partners be investing in?
Thank you, Secretary Clinton, for the question, and of course for your leadership on the connection between gender and climate. This partnership includes governments, private sector companies, foundations, civil society, multilateral organizations, just to name a few. We have partners across the United States government. I mentioned some of them. Of course, the founding partners were USAID and the Department of State, and we are now joined by the Development Finance Corporation and the Millennium Challenge Corporation. We also have a number of private sector partners. You're going to hear from some of them in a minute. We've had private sector partners like Reckitt, the Visa Foundation, MasterCard, and UPS. And today we are joined by a few other partners, including Ambassador Tilley from Australia, which made an important $160 million commitment through 2032. And Kara Hurst from Amazon, which is a founding partner in the Climate Gender Equity Fund, one of our really flagship programs under WISE. And finally, Melanie Nakagawa from Microsoft, which through LinkedIn is tracking data on women's participation in green and blue sectors in the United States and around the world. The WISE initiative has a three-part strategy. First, we are going to be promoting well-paid, quality jobs for women in green and blue sectors, and ensuring that women have the skills and training they need to participate in those jobs. Also, workforce protections, labor protections to make sure that they can succeed in those jobs, and other support that they need to compete and work in those industries. Second, we aim to increase the number of women-owned and led businesses in these sectors by increasing opportunities for access to financial services and for investment in opportunities for women. And third, we are focused on eliminating obstacles to women's economic participation, including by advancing girls' access to STEM education and breaking down barriers, everything from land rights, inheritance rights, to gender-based violence, which really impede the ability for women to participate in these sectors and other sectors, of course, and inhibit innovation and growth.
Well, it's very exciting that this is a public-private partnership, that we have not only the United States government that initiated it and obviously helping to fund and administer it, but other countries as well. And Kristen, I want to turn to you because Australia joined early on as one of the founding partners and committed an impressive $160 million for initiatives that advance women's participation in green and blue industries like energy and environmental conservation. So could you tell us a little more about why Australia made this commitment and what you hope to see come from it?
Thanks very much, Secretary. Look, I think the very simple answer of why Australia thinks these sorts of initiatives are important and is investing in it ourselves domestically and internationally is because it makes sense socially, it makes sense economically, and it makes sense for the climate as well. I'll give you two examples that will be relevant for the sorts of discussions that are happening in the negotiating rooms and in the side events at the COP right now. So decarbonisation and climate finance. So firstly, with decarbonisation, as we all know, given the significant scale of the actual build that is required to transform the world's energy systems, we absolutely are going to have workforce challenges to get all the skills and labour and qualified expertise coming forward to help that transition. So if you're not actually targeting and thinking innovatively about how to bring women into that not just challenge but opportunity, then you're starting behind the 8 ball. I'm going to give you an example I heard on the radio in Australia recently. It was about a factory in a regional town, and for illustrative purposes, let's say it was a solar PV factory. And they were trying really hard. They had a whole lot of demand, and they were trying to expand their workforce to meet that demand. And they were advertising for a storeman. Didn't get any applications at all. Really struggling, went for months, couldn't get any applications. Got some advice, changed their advertisement. They didn't call it a storeman, they called it a store person. And they removed the requirement of the prerequisite for all applicants to have a forklift licence, and instead said, we will train the successful applicant to drive forklifts. 10 women applied for that job, and they were able to then tap into the growth in that industry. Second example, very quickly, climate finance, and in particular through our development assistance. So Australia's released a new international development policy, which has right at the heart of it climate and gender. So it includes targets that 80% of all new investments must effectively address gender equality, and it also has, starting with a target that half of all new investments over $3 million must have a climate outcome, rising to 80% in years ahead. Obviously, mathematically, you can't achieve both those goals if you do them separately. You've got to do that together. So it's about integrating climate and gender outcomes through our development policy. One quick example of how we're already doing that is something with our partners in Tonga through their renewable energy program. They've got a goal of 70% renewable energy by 2025 in Tonga. Very ambitious goal. Australia's supporting that achievement of that goal, in particular with a program where women have been trained to build and maintain power lines to allow the renewable energy to come in. That gives those women ongoing secure jobs, economic empowerment, and it breaks down those gender stereotypes about women in technical roles.
Well, I think it's really significant that in addition to the specific steps that Australia is taking, including focusing on gender as an issue in climate, you have joined forces because this whole idea of partnership among nations, between governments and the private sector, philanthropies, not-for-profits, has to be taken even more seriously today, because we cannot possibly meet the challenges without that. And so let me turn to you, Melanie, because you know, despite the critical importance of gender diversity in tech for fostering innovation and addressing climate change, women remain underrepresented in STEM fields, and we know that LinkedIn, a Microsoft company that you're representing, is also a WISE partner and is committing $4 million to the Green Skills Fund. Why was that decision made, and how do you see it as helping to empower women and girls, not only to thrive in tech, but for tech to welcome women and girls to be part of the solution?
Thank you so much, and just thrilled to be here with all of you, especially on a day like today. Having been to many of these COPs, it really is such a privilege and an honor to be able to be here on a day like this, really focused on such an important topic. And so you mentioned data, and of course, you know, I can't be who I am and represent Microsoft without having a good conversation about where the data is to date. And I'll say that to really transform the global economy, we need the sustainability workforce to really start to advance with sustainability skills. You gave some great examples. And globally, what we're seeing is that green hiring is actually outpacing the regular overall hiring. So today, actually, LinkedIn has released a new report called the COP28 Global Climate Stocktake on the Sustainability Skills Shortage. And to be honest, the data is a little bit sobering. It's finding that 9 in 10 women lack a single green skill. And while women have been joining the green workforce at a faster pace than men, it's just not fast enough, and that gap is widening. So we need to continue to empower the workforce, especially women with these green skills that are needed to drive climate progress going forward. And I think there are bright spots. I really appreciated the ambassador's examples of some of those bright spots, because that's what the data is starting to show. As I said, there are more women entering the workforce. So we're seeing stats like women are 64% more likely to have skills related to sustainability. But as I said, more needs to be done. And so for Microsoft and LinkedIn, we're offering new sustainability skills courses, digital skilling courses. We've added 11 new skills courses for sustainability learning, for carbon and circularity and supply chains and things like that to help bring more women and girls into that workforce and with these skills. In addition, with about 1 billion users of LinkedIn, this creates a massive opportunity to bring scale to these types of skills and green skilling programs, so we can really close this widening gap when it comes to gender and green skills. So frankly, the next time we do a panel like this, there'll be 80 of us on stage talking about what we're doing in sustainability skilling.
Well, I think it's really important to stress the point that you made about skills. These are not just skills that we want young girls to acquire. These are skills that we need programs available for women at any stage of their work life to acquire. You know, we should start thinking about this as, yes, STEM education for girls as they go through their education, but also STEM skills training for early career, mid-career, as you begin to look at the opportunities that are available because of climate-related employment. So I think LinkedIn is a great partner because you have such a broad reach. And I hope that you're able to influence employers to do more to recruit and promote women at all stages of their careers to acquire these skills. But, you know, we will look forward to seeing some results from that. Seema, it is really significant that, sadly, despite a lot of efforts by the people in this room and literally millions more around the world, we are still falling short in meeting our climate and gender equality goals. And it's really clear that gender equality cannot any longer be an afterthought. Like, it'd be a nice thing to add on what we're doing on adaptation and mitigation. Well, let's figure out what to do about gender, because it has to be seen as it is, which is a central driving factor in whether or not we're going to meet our goals. And how is the UN Environment Program and UN Women and all of the UN various elements that you know so well from your long professional association addressing this critical intersection between gender equality and climate and figuring out better and more ways to integrate the two?
Thank you very much. It is really an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. And thank you very much, Mrs. Clinton, for your leadership on gender and climate, which is really key. Yes, you are right. We are falling short of reaching our gender and climate goals. And actually, we are falling short on reaching most, or if not all, the Sustainable Development Goals, most important of which for us today is to talk about the SDG 5, which we are also short of really addressing and really coming to fruition on what the goals are. The important thing to say is that the accelerating impacts of climate change are also seen most when women and girls in the areas where they live and in the areas that are most affected. So girls and women and girls are affected most and first, as in so many other crises as well. So what we urgently really need to do is to change course and to work together to see how best we can change course in what we do. So the work of UN Women and all our partners is very critical in this situation, and also to discuss it here amongst us today at this COP, which, as you said, Mrs. Clinton, this is the first time ever that we have a gender and climate meetings such as these being part of this COP. First of all, what UN Women is trying to do is to have gender-responsive, just transition to sustainable, low-carbon economy. And that is key. Evidence shows us that the number of jobs, for example, in the renewable energy sector could nearly triple by 2030. Therefore, we have to invest in women to close this gap now and for the future. And doing that is key. We are told through the data that the number of renewable energy sector jobs will increase from 12.27 million to 38 million jobs by 2030. We need to have women in those jobs. And we need to give those jobs to women. And as we have said, women need to be there for those jobs as well. The second thing that we are doing is to facilitate women's and girls' full, equal, and meaningful participation. Their leadership, decision-making, collective action, all this is important as well for gender and climate. For example, I was recently in Tanzania, and I saw how new technologies and using the better energy facilities can help in agriculture. When it helps in agriculture, smart agriculture, then it is helping women and girls, then it is integrating women and girls into the climate mitigation and the climate work, and also it is helping women themselves to have a better life and to have their families also to have a better life, therefore their communities and their countries. So this is also something important we need to look at, and preserving and valuing indigenous knowledge is key, ancestral knowledge is key and important for the economy and for climate justice. And I say this because I see a lot of indigenous women when I visit countries around the world, especially when we look at how climate and gender intersect, and the knowledge that they have, the passing on of this knowledge that they have is so critical for what we want to do for climate together. And another area where we really need to look at is to close the data gaps. We all talk about data. UN Women believes that to effectively action and guide this, we need to have monitored gender-responsive data and the impacts of that on women. The data that we can use to have better policies, to have better programs, to have more involvement of women. Without data, we will not be able to really make good decisions and enlightened decisions about how and where we want women and how and where we can effectively address the intersection between climate and gender. So statistics are important to create more impactful and important and inclusive responses. And finally, I want to say that last week, UN Women and partners convened a global gender and environment data conference here for the first time ever. So we are really seeing first time ever situations where women and girls and gender issues and climate come together. And throughout the two-day conference, we heard about the challenges of having the right gender data and how to track the right gender data, how to track gender-responsive initiatives on policies and including, and importantly, climate finance. So, despite our knowledge and evidence of the critical contribution women can make to climate solutions, I'm sorry to say that only 0.01% of funding worldwide goes to projects supporting climate and women's rights. And this also we have to change, because we need more investment and more funding to support what we are talking about in this panel and throughout this important conference and this important day. So finally, I would say the last point is to invest in gender equality is investing really in our common future, in our common humanity, and it will create actually more peaceful, more sustainable and more inclusive societies. And I think this is the major goal of all of us in the world today. It has never been more urgent that we do this, and as UN Women, we will continue to push the frontiers in these areas, as I know you all will as well. Thank you again.
Well, thanks so much, Seema. And it is obviously critically important that the UN, and particularly UN Women, continue to drive this, and your reminder that we need more data, we need more reliable data to measure ourselves as to whether we're making progress, because the statistic you gave, which was what, 0.01% of all funding goes to women-led, women-owned, women-managed companies in the climate space. So there is certainly a lot of room to grow, but we need those measurements in order to determine whether we are and to hold all of us accountable. Let me turn now to you, Kara, because Amazon plays a huge role in the global supply chain, facilitating the movement of products all over the world. And you are also a partner in WISE and committed $53 million to accelerate women's climate innovation, which included $3 million to launch the Climate Gender Equity Fund with the United States Agency for International Development. Well, you have a global perspective and literally on the ground, because you're delivering packages to people living in all kinds of places and climates and situations. So why was Amazon interested in focusing on empowering women at this point?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question and also the opportunity to be here with you today and the leadership and to be with all these amazing women up here. This starts actually with this issue of climate and climate science being an absolutely critical topic for all of us at Amazon, for the communities where we all live and work and operate, and for the planet that we're on. And we took a look at the science, the IPCC reporting, and what's happening in the world around us, and wanted to move much faster. So it started with our commitment to be net zero carbon by 2040 across our global operations, and our commitment to the climate pledge, and thinking about how we could move much faster to decarbonize our own operations. And when we looked at that and thought about how we could invest heavily in renewable energy, how we could invest in early stage decarbonizing technologies, and think about where we could take moonshots, where we could think about new advancements in new materials, in circularity, really across everything that we're working on. What else could we do in the communities where we operate? And then how could we apply a gender lens to that? So collaboration is a key part of that in everything that we do. When we think about industries that we work in, whether it's transportation or the built environment, or in shipping or logistics or packaging or in the products that we make, none of these industries will move with one company alone. None of these will move with one community alone. And we don't have a lot of time in any of this. And I think everyone in this room or anyone who's attending COP here knows that. So we really wanted to think about what are the things we could do collaboratively. And obviously the programs that you've set up through WISE and the work at USAID, we thought was just an excellent partner to move ahead. And then we took a look, of course, at the research through a gender lens, which shows that women are more likely than men to make climate smart decisions on behalf of their communities, and women are more likely than their male counterparts to innovate on complex challenges, to move the climate crisis ahead more quickly. And of course, the data that you shared, Seema, that again, climate finance is not reaching the women who actually have the solutions for climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So we're losing out, and we don't have time. So that really moved us to think about how could we take a part of the Climate Pledge Fund that we have that was investing in these technologies and redirect it more specifically towards women who already have the solutions and who know what to do with those solutions, but just needed more access to that finance. How could we remove some of the barriers that existed out there? And while this may be the first COP where we may be officially talking about the nexus between gender and climate, I would be willing to bet that many of you in this room have been working on this issue for many, many years and talking about the intersections between health and gender and climate, and trying to work on those barriers for many, many years. And so we just looked at what could Amazon do to create mechanisms, what could we do to take down those barriers, and what could we do to really shine a spotlight on some of the wonderful work that was already going on and has been going on for many, many years. So we are looking at incubators, we're looking at accelerators, we are looking at financial mechanisms that are already trying to invest with a gender lens and thinking about how can we accelerate the work that is already existing rather than trying to set up something new. So where can we think about investing in talent that exists already? And we have already chosen 3 organizations to invest in. So they are all in Africa, and the first is a woman-led acceleration hub in Nigeria, a clean tech hub that is scaling new climate tech. The other is an accelerator in South Africa called Womb Hub, a female-led STEM for a STEM organization for women business founders, and the other is an incubator in Kenya called Mshala, which is focused on women entrepreneurs who are doing climate-smart agricultural solutions. So one of the points we're making here is these solutions exist. Women are leading. They know what's needed. And we just want to put resources behind them and remove some of the barriers and go forward in collaboration and really make the capital available. And already we're aiming to create on this climate gender equity fund a fund of $60 million. And with our partners, some of the founders that were mentioned originally in the UPS Foundation and the Visa Foundation and Reckitt and with Amazon, we've already created a fund of $20 million. So we're well on our way. And this is a wide open invitation to anyone else who would like to join us here to get us to that $60 million and hopefully far beyond to create access to more capital for the great solutions that already exist out there.
Well, I think it's really important, Kara, that you pointed out there are people, women, already doing this work everywhere in the world, and they can't get access to capital to take their ideas or their very small enterprise to any kind of scale. And what you're doing with Amazon and the examples you gave us were to invest in founders, managers with good ideas, products, services that could be part of the solution if they were able to grow further. And I just want to underscore that because in our remaining time, I want to go quickly down everyone here and ask them to maybe share with the audience what is the one area that you want to see more investment in when it comes to women and climate? What kind of enterprises, what kinds of ideas, what sort of platforms? Because we really need to get a sense of what it is we're looking for that we think can make a difference. So, Kara, I'm going to start with you because you already gave us an idea of the three you're doing. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I'm really excited about another investment we made in a company called Genesis, led by a female scientist that is working on biodegradable plastic material, because I think circularity is a big issue as well. Many communities are suffering from, a lot of waste material, and I think that's one company. You can read more about it through our Climate Pledge Fund that we've invested in, but anything that we can do to reduce waste and put less things into landfill is excellent, so we're really excited about that. Circularity investment.
Great. Seema.
I think I would argue that we need to invest more in smart agriculture. Most of the women and girls who are going to be suffering more and more from poverty throughout the world live in areas where they are planting their own farms, where they are doing the agriculture themselves, where they don't own land, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into all the issues, but to invest in those women and in smart agriculture where they can really reap the benefits of their own work and reap the benefits of our knowledge as well, and our data and our policies is so important. If I may, I want to say one more thing. I'm not good at just saying one thing, but the other thing is, please, all of you and all of us should always keep our gender lens on in everything we do and in every area we are working, because without the 50% of the world, we cannot achieve much. And actually, we cannot achieve any of our development goals, any of our goals. So we need women to be there all the time, at the table, in decision-making, in leadership, and everywhere, so that we are finally having an equal world. And I thank you.
Thank you, Seema. Melanie.
Great, thank you. I'd say the other area for investment is in digital skills. This is an incredible opportunity to bring breakthrough technologies into the forefront even faster than ever before. Technologies like AI can speed up and accelerate the pace of progress from years to months to weeks. And that's exactly what this conference is about, is can we move at the speed and scale required to meet the challenge? And so how do we make sure that women and young girls, and I loved your point about all ages, all stages of life, how do we get them the digital skills as we close the digital skills gap? How do we close that gap, getting more women into the workforce, using these types of skills so we can accelerate the pace of our progress?
Great. Kristen.
Thanks very much. I'm going to pick up a point that Seema was making at the end and make it relevant for the sorts of engagements that governments typically have at meetings like this. Invest in developing countries to send more women to the COP in their delegations, to train them, to support them, to fund them coming here and to mentor them. A number of delegations like Australia have been supporting that. We do it a lot with Pacific Island countries for a number of years. In my sort of 15 years of when I started negotiations, had a big gap and back at them, I am actually seeing the outcomes of investments that were made 10 years ago in doing that with some of the Pacific women leaders that are negotiating here at the COP today. So it doesn't just have to be governments. Companies could look at doing that as well.
That's great. Jen?
I guess I work for the Biden administration because the word that comes into mind is jobs. These are the jobs of the future. We need people to fill these jobs with the skills that are needed to attack this climate crisis, but it's also good for the women who will take these jobs. So they need jobs and the support, things like caregiving, to be able to take the jobs, succeed in the jobs, and that will help all of us.
Well, I think you've heard some excellent suggestions and perspectives about how to do more to make sure that women and girls are part of the ongoing efforts to stem the effects of climate change through mitigation and adaptation. I want to underscore what Seema said, which is to constantly look at whatever you're doing, what you're investing in, through that gender lens. Make sure that if they're not women leaders around, you find them, you recruit them, you help them, you give them a chance to compete for more of the capital that is being aggregated to provide solutions to our climate challenge. And remember, too, that the pushback on women's rights, which is going on as we speak in many, many places in the world, requires even more diligence and more energy to overcome the bias, the prejudice that exists in terms of giving women a real chance, giving them the abilities and skills that they need to compete. And I really want to issue a challenge to everyone here, regardless of whether you're in a government agency, a national agency, or a multilateral one, whether you are in the private sector, big business, medium, small, micro, whether you are in a philanthropy, a not-for-profit, an individual interest, whatever it might be. Please take seriously the challenge as to what you will do in whatever capacity you can to make sure that we don't just have this day about gender and climate here at COP, but we have an ongoing commitment. And think to yourself about what kind of commitment you could make. Because we've talked about the positive side of the equation with gender and climate, but there's a negative side, which is that women and girls disproportionately bear the burden of climactic events. They are more likely to be affected by natural disasters and particularly by extreme heat. Extreme heat is becoming one of the biggest challenges to everyone, but particularly to women, and particularly to women in the global south, who work in either positions outside in the informal economy. They're in fields, they're in factories, they're in markets, they're doing all kinds of work that becomes absolutely impossible if temperatures get to 40, 50 degrees centigrade. And we're seeing and beginning to pay attention and to count and record the deaths that are related to climate, and by far the biggest killer is extreme heat. I mean, even in Europe last summer, which has the ability to count and figure out what happened, they recorded 61,000 deaths because of the heat in Europe. We don't have that kind of number yet from Africa, Asia, Latin America, but we know and estimate that we probably could measure about 500,000 deaths. And the majority of those are women and girls, and particularly pregnant women who have special challenges in extreme heat. So think about the positive side, about what you can do, commitments you can make that will really operationalize the idea of getting more women as part of the solutions when it comes to climate, and think about the negative side, what you can do to help ameliorate the dangers and the burdens that women increasingly are trying to live with. So let's give another round of applause to our panel. Thank you all very much. Ambassador Geeta Rao Gupta, the American Global Women's Ambassador, to give remarks.
Thank you, Secretary Clinton. I am so honored to share the stage with you today and to have the opportunity to hear from so many pioneers in women's economic security, women and climate change, and the advancement of women's rights more broadly. Happy Gender Day to all of you. As some of you may have heard me mention this morning, this is the first COP that I am attending as U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues. I'm here to absorb and learn as much as I can so that I can be the best advocate possible for the women and girls of the world who are experiencing the impacts of climate change, as Secretary Clinton said, disproportionately and uniquely. In the 6 months that I have been on the job, the climate crisis has come up during the majority of meetings that I have had in the United States, in India, Iceland, and Kenya, even when the meeting did not seemingly relate to climate issues or include climate on the agenda. This is because women and girls across the globe are facing intersecting challenges, compounding crises, all at the same time. And this is perhaps no more striking than in the case of the climate crisis, which intersects with all of the most pressing issues facing women and girls today, from gender-based violence to economic security to conflict and peace. In my meetings and travels, the challenge of food insecurity, which is exacerbated by the climate crisis, has especially risen to the forefront as an increasingly critical challenge. The best way to illustrate this is what I saw firsthand on a trip to Kenya this past summer. We weren't there specifically to talk about the climate crisis, but its impacts were clear everywhere. As we drove, we passed emaciated cattle, dead cattle, a literal death knell for the majority agrarian community that we were visiting. We saw how this specifically impacted one of the programs the US helps to fund, which is to address female genital mutilation and cutting, or what we call FGMC. The reason climate change is linked to FGMC is because as natural resources become increasingly scarce, families feel the pressure to reduce their expenses and to give their girls away in early child and forced marriages, which as a coping mechanism. And FGMC typically occurs before a child becomes a bride. The leaders of these villages want to address FGMC and child marriage, but we need to be aware that there is no single FGMC or child marriage intervention. This is about increasing economic security for the entire family, including by pursuing climate mitigation strategies and shifting cultural norms all at once. And this is only going to get worse. The compounding effects of the climate crisis and related instability on women and girls' safety and health is projected to grow, including in climate emergencies like the long-term drought that we witnessed in Kenya. Higher temperatures, dwindling freshwater supplies, and extreme weather events are making food production more difficult across the globe. Due to their traditional roles managing natural resources, this new reality is leaving women and girls especially vulnerable to these challenges in distinct and acute ways. Worldwide, women and girls are responsible for 90% of tasks related to preparing food, and women constitute a substantial portion of the agricultural workforce globally. Yet they regularly encounter barriers in access to resources, decision-making spaces, and adaptive capacity, and these barriers limit their ability to effectively adapt to climate change. Climate-induced food insecurity significantly impacts women and girls whose households depend on them to provide sustenance, and it is markedly more difficult to secure during climate crises, especially given their limited control over food-related decisions. Recent modeling of a worst-case climate scenario predicts that 236 million more women and girls will be pushed into food insecurity due to climate change by 2050. So how do we help ensure women are able to access or grow the food that they need? How do we help women farmers adapt to climate stressors, too much or too little water, rising temperatures, and more, in order to safeguard their livelihoods? How do we ensure that they have access to land, credit, and training in climate-resilient farming techniques? Over the past year, the US government has worked to integrate the gender-climate nexus, including the issue of food insecurity, into all of our gender strategies. Most notably, in August, my office released the first ever US strategy to respond to the effects of climate change on women. The strategy acknowledges that natural resource scarcity and other impacts of climate change are leading to women's and girls' increased risk of encountering gender-based violence, conflict, and insecurity, and losing educational and livelihood opportunities. It also recognizes the critical role of women in developing effective solutions to climate adaptation and mitigation challenges in all sectors and at all levels. In addition, our 2022 US strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally includes for the first time ever an objective on the nexus between GBV and climate and the environment. And also for the first time, the updated 2023 US Strategy and National Action Plan for Women, Peace and Security, released in October, connects that agenda, the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and especially women's leadership on disaster relief and recovery, with the climate crisis. Lastly, our first ever US strategy on global women's economic security recognizes the climate crisis as a cross-cutting component of each of its objectives, including the critical education and skills in STEM that women and girls need to contribute to economic opportunities and solutions. But for our strategies to have a chance at being successful, we must support best practices and solutions developed by women and girls themselves. As primary custodians of food knowledge and preservation, women and girls are crucial stakeholders in addressing food insecurity induced or exacerbated by climate change. One way my office is amplifying women and girls developing translatable solutions to climate-related challenges is via our Innovation Station initiative, which helps women climate innovators build networks with new communities to share best practices and develop collaborations. The Innovation Station is amplifying women and girls leading food security and agricultural resilience efforts, including women and girls who are developing, for example, perennial grain crops to improve soil health, modular sustainable agricultural systems out of shipping containers, precision irrigation technologies that respond to water needs of plants in real time, and best practices for agroforestry. In addition, a number of the US government's COP28 gender climate deliverable focus on food insecurity. For example, through a new $1.2 million program, the Department of State will provide training and career pathways to ensure women's workforce opportunities in seed banks and nurseries in Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Jordan, Morocco, and Panama. To dive into the challenges and opportunities I have outlined here, I'd now like to turn the floor over to Sue Binais, Deputy Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, who will moderate our panel discussion on women and food security in the climate crisis. Joining her are Hindu Omaru Ibrahim, President of the Association of Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad, also Executive Director Inga Anderson of the UN Environmental Programme, and Louise Mabulo, founder of the Cacao Project. Shumara Vikramanayaka, Managing Director and CEO of the Macquarie Group, and finally, of course, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second panel. I'm going to start with Hindu. How can we better recognize and leverage the unique expertise of Indigenous women as essential leaders in global adaptation efforts, especially in the face of growing food and climate insecurity?
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see a lot of people in this room for the Women's Day. And I'm so pleased also to be with an amazing woman in this panel and the women leaders. Of course, coming from indigenous communities, they say indigenous women are the most impacted of the climate change. But we refuse to become a victim because we are a solutions. And I'm going to give you a concrete examples on that. So in my organization, who is an Indigenous Women and People Association of Chad, I work with the indigenous women on a traditional knowledge that can help to lead a strategy on adaptation and build the resilience. And in that project, of course, you need a specific data. So I use the science knowledge, traditional knowledge, and technology. The science from the satellite imageries, the high resolution one. I take this, I go to the communities. The best satellite image in front of the communities is like no data. Because even if it gives you a forest, it cannot tell you in this forest if there is a fruit trees, or if it's a medicinal tree, or a sacred trees, or if it is a bird who can sitting on it, or insect, etc. So those knowledge are owned by the communities. When they start mapping it, of course, man comes the first. They put all the bigger repair. They're so happy about it. And they start arguing about a small knowledge who is known maybe by few of them. So this is the time I love more. When they start arguing around over 2 hours, then I say, may we ask a woman? They say, like, yes, just to call her. So I call one woman. She stand up. She start explaining the knowledge. And you see everyone just like shaking their head. At the end, I say like, what do you think? Are you agree with her? They say, yes. At the end, the women knowledge are so vital and they know that better than everyone. And this proof of the project is mean we need to get seat women in the decision-making table. Women must be the one who can lead the adaptation and resilience. Women must be the one who can lead when we are taking decisions in this kind of conference, because they know what they are talking about, they know the solution on the ground, and they are implementing it as a climate solution implementation, not as a climate talks. So that's why it is very important to get a seat for the women, for the indigenous women with our traditional knowledge.
Thanks, Hindu. Executive Director Anderson, Inger, how does UNEP integrate the perspectives of women and girls, especially in areas of environmental insecurity, and how can your approach be used as a model for others?
First, I should say what she said, right? I mean, because that was absolutely outstanding, and Hindu is such a brilliant leader and just shows us the way. But look, I mean, we should sort of imagine a world where there is only half of the population of this good earth involved in the big decisions, involved and taken into account. And when we do look at the leaders of the delegation for the COP, it's not hard. I mean, we do have some leaders that are female, but on the delegations, largely male-led, and fewer women. Maybe the women are at the lower, you are a great exception, but, you know, at the lower rungs. That's the reality that we are living. So the female voices are just not recognized at the power table and not recognized across. And this is something that we really have to change. Then, when we look at adaptation finance, we, UNEP, brought out a report just the other day, Adaptation Gap Report. And when we look at that, we can see that of the adaptation projects, just 2% go to female-led and female-empowered type projects. And that is in spite of what the UNFCCC Article 7 says, which it says that all our climate adaptation should be gender responsive. It is not. And so I think what Hindu had at the sort of village level, where the men didn't listen to the women, it's a global, we can just scale it right up. So you ask about what's UNEP doing, and so just to give you a couple of examples, because we are two sides of a coin. We are a nerdy scientific agency, and in our nerdy scientific reports, we try very much to bring out young female scholars, to have them on board, to have always gender balance in our authorship, and so on and so forth. I'm sitting next to another brilliant young person that you will hear from. She is a UNEP youth champion and absolutely amazing, but I won't take her thunder, but you will hear about her. So we promote young women who are doing amazing stuff and try to put them forward so that they can be seen and heard. But a couple of projects, maybe I'll just mention as an example. In Sudan, which is a place where women, it's close to your country, where women are not heard so much. But if you, and I think I'm sitting in front of a Sudanese lady right here, I can see. So in Sudan, we're working at the community level, empowering women, access to credit. Then the moment women have access to credit, then all of a sudden, of course, since they are the agricultural workforce, 60% of agriculture is done by women in poorer countries. And yet women are often unbanked, not getting the technological support, not getting agricultural extension, not having access to the resources that they need. So there's a real reality here. Similarly, in Antigua and Barbuda, we are providing loans to small credits to families to secure their homes against hurricanes, female loans. The repayment is massive, 98% repayment. And of course, the monies go to the right thing. Because women do take care of the family and so on and so forth. We have to accept that in this broad swath where we have drought and desertification, and Hindu is living in that broad swath, women are often the first victims. Men might be migrating to elsewhere, to the cities or to other regions or even other continents. Women are left providing for families, and so it's really critical in adaptation finance and of course in mitigation, and we heard that in the previous panel, that we are paying very good attention to women, because failing to do that, frankly, we cannot solve the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thanks, Inger. Louise, as an effective advocate for sustainable agriculture and food security, maybe you could share the benefits from working with women in your efforts to build up food systems in typhoon-vulnerable areas.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Sue. And it's a really interesting question because I'm from the Philippines. I live in one of the most climate-vulnerable regions to hazards brought about by climate change. So if you think about the aftermath of a storm and what it looks like, it's usually just brown, desolate lands and floods, and that's the first thing you think. But you would find that women are the first responders. Why? Because not only are we disproportionately affected, but we're also the people who have added care work. The first thing we have to do is to clean. We have to take care of our families, our moms, our children, our partners, and just really think about the next meal that you're going to cook. Because obviously, our first thought is immediately survival. But the added burden of care work really puts women in the unique position to think critically about what we need to do to find solutions. So when I began my initiative, it's in the agricultural industry. You think it's inherently male-dominated. You think of a farmer, you think of an older man working out in a field. But as I was going through this work, I noticed that most of the people who were attracted to the idea of sustainable, regenerative agriculture, who wanted to be in on the mission of rethinking our food systems, were women. They were the ones who understand the inherent links of climate, of environment, how that ties into the community, how that ties into the economy, how through our harvests we're feeding our families, we're putting our children through school, and that is also taking care of our forest ecosystem that provides these services like windbreakers in the events of typhoons. And it was always women who immediately understood this concept. And oftentimes it was the men who were a little bit stubborn. In these like little farmer field schools that we would host, they would say, well, I don't see why I would change things. And it's the women who are just like, that's because I'm the one handling the problems in the aftermath of these storms, and I know what we need to do next. So if we're going to design a whole new food system around climate resilience, it has to be led by women, because there's no pathway towards 1.5 degrees or even reducing greenhouse gas emissions without addressing that 30% of GHG emissions. And that means rural women at the front lines of thinking of these innovative solutions. And I think something that harkens to what you've all mentioned earlier, we don't really know what a future or what an institution that is led by women looks like yet. But maybe through all of these grants that UNEP has generously given, through all of these projects that women here are leading, we can think of a world that is inherently climate smart, that is inherently regenerative, and maybe because those solutions were designed by the women who are at the front lines.
Thanks, Louise. Shamara, you're next. In your experience, how do women feel the impacts of climate change in emerging markets, and what are you doing at Macquarie to take on these impacts?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say it's fantastic to see such a packed room, because I think Secretary Clinton was saying this is the first time at COP that we've had something focusing on women and gender, and I've been on a lot of panels and I haven't seen such a packed room, so thank you everybody for taking interest in this important topic. I think, again, like Secretary Clinton and Inga talked about impacts on women from climate change and why they are more drastic and worse impacted. And that's because typically women, especially in low-income countries, are the ones that are not accessing the same levels of education, of decision-making rights, but also access to financial resources in terms of, land assets, credit, etc., and even access to employment. So typically they are in the informal, self-employed economies. You find them out on farms, in factories, out in markets. And when we have extreme heat, as you said, they are the ones suffering the worst consequences. And so you asked what someone like us, Macquarie Group, is doing. We're a financial services organisation, an intermediary. Really, many actors are required to drive solutions here. We need the governments to come up with policy and regulatory frameworks to set incentives for the vast capital in the world in the private markets to go and drive solutions. We need MDBs to come and provide first loss investments, but we also need people like us in the private sector, both in finance and real economy, to then develop solutions that can be scaled, pilot projects. So if I can just give an example of one thing we're doing to show how we're trying to go in from the bottom up, grassroots, and develop solutions. One of the things we're doing is developing better cook stoves in Africa. So people may not be familiar, but typically the women are doing the cooking, and they use these three-stone fires that use charcoal and firewood, excessive amounts of fuel compared to these efficient cook stoves we can roll out, which are causing climate issues with deforestation, but also bad for the women who have to do more work gathering much greater amounts of fuel. So to the extent we can get these cook stoves into their homes, the other big thing it's doing is helping with emissions, because the insufficient burning of fossil fuels releases black carbon, which is one of the biggest causes of GHG emissions. So the emissions are much higher from this sort of cooking that they're using. It's also really bad for their health because they don't have ventilation in these homes, and it's causing a lot of health impacts on the women and the children.
So these cook stoves basically use 25 to 50% less fuel, but they also are basically eliminating the black carbon emissions because they're completely burning fossil fuels, but they also are 95% reducing the carbon monoxide. Now, clearly they can't afford these things, but what we're able to do with the frameworks available is roll these things out for free. So we've put 1 million into Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia so far. We're doing another 400,000 now going into Angola. And the way we fund it is through the carbon market. So a group called Vera, who does validation and verification of carbon credits, is doing analysis on the carbon emissions saved through these cook stoves, and we are able to then sell those credits. So, work's needed in data and verification and market creation, which is what people like us can do. But we've been able to roll these out using frameworks that governments use, sometimes MDB, first loss catalytic financing, but creating a real economy solution that can engage financial markets and give a proper return for risk from the carbon markets, but drive real solutions in terms of, yes, climate impact and reducing emissions, but also for these women and children in the homes, less work gathering fuel, less health issues for them, and hopefully better economic prosperity in terms of releasing time. So it's a tiny example and probably frustrating that we have to do so many little things to build up pilots and scale, but these are some of the things that a financial institution like us can do to play a role.
Secretary Clinton, as we take action to empower more women in the climate space, what are the solutions you've seen throughout your career or that are emerging now that should be scaled or replicated?
Well, Sue, that's a really important question, and one that I hope collectively we're all thinking about, because you heard already about some of the solutions, some of the approaches to solving these problems, and there are, I would estimate, millions around the world. But what doesn't happen is taking them to scale. What doesn't happen is creating a viable market for certain advances that enable people to make a better living, get more harvest from their farmland, do so many things that would both improve their lives and improve the climate. So just to say a few things about this, because scalability is the key, and we can't get to scalability without the kind of smart investment and cooperation that we were talking about on the first panel and that we are hearing again from the panelists. So let's take agriculture, food and agriculture. As was already said, women are the majority of farmers in the world. They're smallhold farmers. They might be tenant farmers. But it's women who are tilling the fields and harvesting whatever they're growing. About 60% plus of farmers everywhere in the world, and yet they often don't have scalable solutions to the problems that they face. They don't have access to advanced drought-resistant seeds or to appropriate pesticides. They don't have scale to combine what they produce beyond what their families need to go into a bigger market. They don't have access to dry or cold storage. There are so many ways that we could better organize the small farming community, again, primarily involving women, increasing their yield, increasing the potential money they could make from selling excess products, creating better markets, particularly in places that right now are facing all kinds of food challenges, whether it's weather conditions or competition. We could do so much more, and when I was secretary, we started a program called Feed the Future, which was intended to do that. How do we create better opportunities? And I think that's an imperative now, because we are seeing a lot of places around the world where they need help revitalizing their soil, fighting erosion, and creating better conditions to continue to grow food. We also should look at, different kinds of greenhouses or hydroponics, things that could be introduced in some areas that might help deal with some of the weather challenges that farmers are facing. And we've got to do more to link markets. I mean, big agricultural concerns, dominate markets, and it's not a fair fight. You don't have the organized efforts of the vast majority of farmers being able to compete and create wealth for themselves. Clean cook stoves, which is an issue that we have worked on for more than a decade now, as you heard, it is a climate issue, it's a health issue, an environmental issue, and an economic issue. And we've made a lot of progress. I worked with the Clean Cook Stove Alliance, and they've done a lot of work with private and public sector partners, but we still have to take it to scale. And it can't be done the same everywhere in the world because you don't have the same sources of fuel. People's habits and preferences about cooking determine the kind of cook stove they feel comfortable using. But we've got a lot of good data about what works. We just have to, once again, kind of take it to scale. And, you look around the world, and really all of our climate problems have been solved somewhere, but not everybody knows about the solutions, and they don't go to scale, which is, the real loss in terms of being able then to model and spread these solutions. So I guess, you could come up with a lot more examples because there are many of them, but the point is really look for ways to help aggregate what people are already doing in local areas and try to help them get better organized and help them create, markets so that what they're doing will be recognized and funded so they have a revenue stream to continue doing it, and try to, work with what is working. Because right now we have, there's enough work for everybody to do. We have some new exciting approaches. I met a young woman entrepreneur who was using bamboo to create electricity. With a little bit of funding, which she's looking for and doesn't yet have, she might be able to show a proof of concept that could then be used, to spread that idea and that technology and create that scale. So it's critically important, since we are racing the clock here, to find out what works and to understand whether it can be expanded in the local area where it's already operating, at the very least, or how much further it could be perhaps utilized. But I'm very excited and very optimistic that if we get smart about what is already being done and help people with good ideas go even further and invest, particularly in women who are on the ground and understand a lot of the local challenges that they have to overcome in order to help create a sustainable economy, we could make a lot of progress in the next few years.
Let me direct one more question to you, if I might. What advice would you give to COP delegates who are fighting for greater empowerment and integration for women and girls in the climate space, but facing barriers and setbacks?
Well, I think we should all answer that quickly because we all have a particular perspective. And as I said in the earlier panel, look at what you're doing through the gender lens. Some of you are already doing that because you're here, but some of you could do more of that, and some of you could do that at least for the first time. We have a lot of resources now in the climate space. The Climate Impact Fund that was announced on the very first day, a lot of other contributions to national, international, multinational, private philanthropy funding, but make sure that they're looking at what will advance women's roles in the fight for a sustainable planet and a sustainable economy. And don't take it for granted. Ask the questions, press the point, be willing to say, well, where are women and girls fitting in to what you are doing in your particular area? So that to me is imperative. Ask the question, make the point, and keep asking it and keep making it until you get a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, happy to give my 2 cents. My view is that every challenge looked at from the other side is an opportunity. And in this instance, we're talking about half our population that are living with disadvantage, but the opportunities, if we can unleash the potential of them, the whole community is going to do better. So I'd very much endorse what Secretary Clinton's just saying, is that if we can each be thinking about when we look at a problem that women in these disadvantaged situations are facing and say, how can I actually switch that around? You'll create a whole lot of value, and it's certainly how we operate as a business, is you create value, everyone can share in it, people who benefit, but also, I don't know, your shareholders in businesses, you're in agricultural businesses, finance, etc.
On my end, if you're a woman and you're in these halls, first of all, take up space, speak out, and push the agenda for women. But I think the advice shouldn't be to women. The advice should be to men, to give space to women and give us that seat at the table. And if you're a funder, fund women. If you're a person with a solution or a crazy idea, give that crazy idea, implement it. Because to everyone, women have the solutions and women on the ground are doing the work. It's already there. Just give us that space and that seat on the table, and we'll make your lives so much easier.
I'll just build on what you said. Power is not given, it is taken. And so, you step up and take it, because it's never going to get given. And so women have half of the solutions, as you say. Just speak out, grab the microphone, and have a little bit of sharp elbows. I mean, look, we're sitting with a role model beyond belief, Madam Secretary. And so I think many of us watched you and watched the extraordinary roles that you have played and the extraordinary role model for women. We saw you grab the microphone. And so I think emulate, Madam Secretary.
Maybe we'll give 1 minute each to talk about how we empower, or what kind of advice you give to young people, because there are many in the audience, young women in particular. But I think with Hindu, we'll start with how do you lift up young indigenous people?
I think when we talk about the indigenous peoples, we might all know indigenous peoples protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. And when we talk about climate change, we are talking about our home. We are talking about our resources. We are talking about our land. We are not talking about the commodities. So we are playing a big role on the ground to fight climate change, to conserve all the high-spot biodiversity that are helping us to keep 1.5 if the others make also their job. So we cannot be just a side. Indigenous youths are already taking the wisdom from the indigenous elders. That's what we do in our constituency. So indigenous people's voice must be in the tables. Just so we celebrated the loss and damage finance and many other finance, nature, health, water, etc. We need a direct access finance for the communities that can help the young people, like in my community, who can not leave their land to become a climate refugee, but build their own land, who can be fertile, who can help them to be there and to save their culture, their identity. If we do not have this direct access finance, it's going to be a disaster for all indigenous peoples, but more for the planet. Because when we lose our knowledge, we lose keeping the balance of all the ecosystem. The planet cannot be alive. So we need this direct access finance. And we need also indigenous peoples to be sit in the table. Absolutely. In this loss and damage, we still have one component of governance. Active observer must be there. Because if we are losing those non-economic losses It is our culture, our identity. We are not paying the damage of anything. So be there, please. Give us the seat. Give us direct access finance and make the indigenous women voices with the details of the knowledge that we do have to help us reach the goal that we want, 1.5 to stay alive. Thank you.
Lifting young women, I think, for an older woman, it has to be about making space, inviting in, minimizing your own and maximizing others. I think that's the role we should all be playing. And, you know, because there are brilliant, brilliant minds out there doing awesome things, and making sure we sweep the road for them. Others have swept the road for us. Thank you.
As the resident young person on this panel, I first of all want to express my gratitude to all the women who've paved the way so that I could sit here in front of all of you myself. But if you're a young person in the audience and you're afraid to speak up, just take that first risky step. Honestly, it's just speak out, use your voice. The first step is the hardest, and it's okay if you're young to make mistakes and to change your decisions as you grow up and mature and be better informed. But right now, you see the urgency, and we've led the climate movement, and we brought it to where it is today. It's really important that we continue that momentum and to use the kind of fuss and the social media and the noise that we're doing towards pressuring policymakers and also not just corporations and all of these spaces into making real action. And we need every single one of us, not just one person, but hundreds and thousands of us around the world. So take that first step.
And I'll be really brief because we're past time and everyone has covered it, but I'd completely echo that and say we old people really need the perspectives of you young people. So please challenge us, keep us thinking fresh, or we'll never change or get anything done. So I completely endorse that.
Well, to wrap it up, because I think we're now going to hear some final words from Secretary Kerry, who's been an incredible leader on climate for years. I would only add to what you've heard, particularly if you are gripped with the absolute urgency of doing something, please study what you want to advocate for and get done. Be informed about what you're talking about so that you can literally talk to anybody, whether it's in a cabinet room, a board room, or a living room. You want to be able to talk to people and have a certain level of authority. Passion takes you there, but it won't carry you beyond unless you know what you're talking about and can make a very strong argument for the kinds of changes that you want to see and the solutions that you think can get you to those changes. So please be prepared and be ready to make the case that you want to make to whoever you need to try to convince, because at the end of the day, this is a persuasion campaign. We have to persuade more and more people to do what we believe we know should be done, but we have to make sure that they do their part and they get into, you know, a position to be able to help us avoid the worst crises of what we're facing in the future. So take that passion and harness it to information and advocacy and go forth and do everything you can to make a difference.
Now I'd like to welcome to the stage for closing remarks and a bit of gender diversity, a man who needs no introduction, former Secretary of State, and now we're going to have two former Secretaries of State, and current Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you, and thank you for letting one man be on the panel. I'm appreciative. Frankly, I haven't had a chance to sit through all the panels, and I rarely get that chance, but I'm really glad I could today. I think you will agree with me that this was brilliant. encouraging, inspirational, and so important in terms of a conversation to motivate so many other people who aren't here to be part of this battle. So I thank you, every single one of you who spoke so emphatically today to remind us of the powerful truth. You can't address the climate crisis without empowering the women of the world, and you can't empower women if the world doesn't step up and address the crisis of climate. So Director Jennifer Klein, Ambassador Gupta from the Biden-Harris administration, White House, and the Blinken State Department, you have really both put gender issues where they need to be, which is front and center in every single conversation. Let's be clear, and I think for Hillary and for me and those of us who have been working at this, we've known this for some period of time, but women's issues are really inextricably tied to every issue of consequence, none more so than the climate crisis. And on these issues, appropriately, women are setting the standard. Just a few days ago, we listened to Vice President Kamala Harris, who's been a leading voice to combat the crisis, and she delivered the U.S. national statement here at the COP. And you just heard, you see her sitting there at the other end of the line from Hillary, Sue Biniaz, who is literally a treasure and institution with respect to getting anything done at a COP. She's a premier negotiator, our lead negotiator, and she has been to every single COP and really has set the standard for how we get this done. And Christina Chan, who you heard from a little while ago at the very beginning, and she's an adaptation expert. She's our lead for the negotiation to create this new fund for climate impact response. And she won a great victory the other day when the first time in history we passed a controversial issue, difficult issue, right up front on day one of this COP. That's never happened before. And Christine, we really are appreciative, Christina, for your leadership. We also have many other women leaders in my office that I'm privileged to have, I will tell you, on climate finance, climate and security, clean energy, and climate and the ocean. Every single one of them, women, and my terrific chief of staff who's sitting over here, Kitty DiMartino. So listening to these panels, I'm not exaggerating when I say to you, boy, the more we can get you engaged, the more we can get women to the table, the more women whose voices are heard on why these crises are so real in terms of day-to-day life for people all around the world. The more that happens, the more we will be good hands and the more we have a chance of winning this battle. I'm also lucky enough to have two daughters, Alexandra, who's a terrific filmmaker, and who's working on the climate issue right now, and my daughter Vanessa, who's a physician, who happens to now be the WHO, the World Health Organization envoy for health and the environment. And she has started a program in Africa in 5 countries where she, a practicing physician, is now the CEO of an effort that is training and has trained over 40,000 doctors, nurse practitioners, midwives, nurses, in leaves behind a growing infrastructure to be able to sustain the care that is delivered by many people who are concerned about what's happening there. So they've reminded me on more than one occasion, first of all, don't engage in any mansplaining, and secondly, the irony that the modern environmental movement was actually inspired by a trailblazing woman named Rachel Carson, and that very movement has for too many years been seen as male, pale, and Yale. Not so today, I might say. Hillary and I are both veterans of Yale, so maybe we'd make it out. But that's why I'm really glad to be here in Dubai, and particularly with Hillary. Hillary, I'm not exaggerating one iota, and you, I think, felt the warmth of your welcome here, but you really are an inspiration to generations of people around the world, countless of millions, and we thank you for everything you've done. I followed Hillary as Secretary of State, and when I set out as Secretary to stitch the environment, the whole question of the climate crisis, into every fabric of the department, I actually knew right away what a winning playbook looked like. I wanted to do for the climate crisis what Hillary had already done for women and girls, issues at the department. And Hillary, I really couldn't have a better partner now on this initiative, where you and I both need to work together to weave both of these issues together. And that will make us much stronger in our ability to communicate on a global basis. When I think of the women who are on the stage today, my friends, it really couldn't be more clear how much our capacity to be able to win this fight will depend on our ability to be able to bring to people around the world an understanding of the connections that were discussed here today. Women and girls, particularly the most vulnerable, bear a disproportionate burden of the climate crisis. And every single gender disparity is compounded by the crisis. Women are almost invariably, in almost most countries in the world, the managers of the household, the managers of the family, and they are therefore the managers of health, managers of feeding, managers of food production, and ultimately, if it doesn't work out, they're always protecting their children and they're at the forefront even of migration as a result of the forced circumstances of their lives. And in all of this, particularly in certain parts of the world, it's women who don't only just hold together the household, but who have to collect the food, collect the firewood, be able to heat and cook and provide for the capacity of the family to be able to stay together, if it is together, and often isn't. And the underlying gender disparities in everything, access to education, health, information, mobility, resources, training, healthcare, all of it, including that women are often in a position where they are the least likely to survive disaster. And so the State Department, for this reason, recently released the first ever strategy to respond to the effects of climate change on women. And it is precisely why we are now trying to match analysis with advocacy with action, with a full suite of new programs and outreach alongside the WISE initiative. Much of this is going to come through the President's emergency initiative on adaptation, and much of it is going to come because of the commitment of folks like Hillary and Sue and the others who've been here today who are going to keep pressing this issue. So, my friends, earlier I mentioned the godmother of the modern climate cause, Rachel Carson, a diminutive woman who in the 1950s saw what was happening with the spraying of DDT, spraying children, spraying families, spraying streets, communities where people were living and walking around. And she alone discerned that this was a people killer. It was a poison. And she took that fight on. And in doing so, she transformed the entire face of America, because in winning that battle, she set us up for the modern movement that won the battle of 1970 with the first Earth Day and passed the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act, and the Endangered Species Act, and actually created the Environmental Protection Agency. All of that came from this one woman who took on the biggest companies in the world and who won the battle. So she wrote in every outthrust headland, by the way, she's a beautiful writer, almost poetry. And she wrote in every outthrust headland, in every curving beach, in every grain of sand, there is the story of the earth. Women and girls, being the most impacted, are also the greatest validators. And that's why we have to have this last important chapter of the environment movement, which must overcome the climate crisis. And I think it's going to be a chapter that is written by women, for women, told by many of the women who are gathered here and so many others around the world, for the survival of humankind and for the sake of our planet. And that is the message that should go out of COP28 in Dubai. Thank you. You're welcome.
I'd like to invite out the earlier panelists for a photo. No photo? Yes, photo?